Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome for showing up. It's a wonderful day, it's hot, it's sunny, and we are here to discuss with Hito Steyerl and Kevin Billy about what it means to deal with images, our lives, and how we structure our collective experience about with the perception that we have today of the images. As you all know, Kevin Billy is the professor of the future of cinema at the UC in Ticino and for the advancement of audiovisual language. Kevin also gifted us with one of the postcards from the future that we showed on the Piazza Grande. And therefore, with no further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you Hito Steyerl and Kevin Billy. I do believe this will be an extremely engaging and interesting conversation. And at the Locarno Film Festival, we're looking forward to push these programs further and make them even larger and more involving in the future. And thank you, Kevin, for all the efforts and generosity that you are putting into your work. I mean, we're all learning from you, and thank you.
Oh,
and thank you, Hito, for being here today with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonah. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Hito. I also want to acknowledge that we have live translation service provided by our two translators with the benefit of these headsets, which I don't know if they're available for everyone or just for us, but so I think you have this. And yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge the systems of support, both human and technological, that allow us to have experiences like this. This is actually something that I learned from you, Hito, from one of your talks where I think the projector was not working and you said, "Oh, our tired comrade needs rest." So we'll work without him and let him recover for now. So it's just really the kind of surprising and meaningful perspective that you bring to our engagement with technology and media, art, and life, which inspired me to invite you as my first guest for what I hope is an ongoing series of conversations on the future of cinema and audiovisual arts. As Jonah mentioned, I'm the professor for the future of cinema, which is a very pretentious title that seems to have a lot of expectations of authority and answers that no one else possesses. But I take the completely opposite approach. I think for me to do my job well, I need to surround myself with friends and supporters who are smarter than me, smarter and more adept. And so this is why I was so excited, Hito, that you could come to Locarno and engage with us on a conversation both about cinema and about audiovisual arts. Some may wonder about your relationship to cinema because you've really established your reputation primarily through the world of visual arts. You've had exhibitions all over the world, but maybe those who even admire your work don't realize that you have a formal training in film studies at the HFF, Hochschule für Film und Fernsehen, the University of Film and Television in Munich. So this provokes the first question for me within the context of this film festival of what has cinema meant for you maybe in the past as a student of film, and then how has that relationship to cinema evolved through your experience?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, Kevin, for having me, but also to everyone for being here on this very beautiful day. I was just saying to myself, if this is the future of cinema, then it's really not so bad. You know, there is this interesting light breeze under the table. If we could just keep that in every cinema, it would also be so nice for epidemiological reasons and so on and so on. So My relation to cinema, yeah, I wanted to be a filmmaker, but then it didn't work out. So basically, I'm a failed filmmaker. That's my relation to cinema. I was very much hoping to be any kind of filmmaker, and I studied documentary film. I was very much invested in film history for many, many years. But at that point of time, I think the industry really collapsed, right? And the kind of work that at least I wanted to be doing was not any longer possible to make under these circumstances. I think to contextualize it, maybe it was a moment in which basically state television was trying to open up a competition with private television, which meant that a lot of educational, etc., or more complicated experimental programs just fell by the wayside, and there was just no opportunity for me in the industry at all. So somehow, by some detours, I ended up doing something very different, but on the other hand, it's not so different at all, because the work I'm doing is basically very similar to what I was doing as a film student. Only that when I was a film student, no one took it seriously. Basically, I just continued doing what I was doing for the past, 30 years. And somehow by changing the industry or field, its perception changed, let's put it like that.
Okay, so that really speaks to how context determines content, because if you're saying that you did the same thing that you were doing before, but suddenly it provokes a different reaction. So can you say a bit about the difference of context between cinema, the filmmaking world as you've experienced it, and the art world?
I mean, just to be very practical, right? I think in all of the video works I'm doing at least 80 to 90% of all the work myself somehow. It's very DIY, it also takes a lot of time, which is exactly how I used to do it in film school. But I think in a field where the division of labor is so important, also to ensure a sort of smooth scheduling of production and so on, you couldn't really have that time, or it would be seen as amateur or DIY filmmaking, which it is also, yeah.
Okay, so amateurism as a methodology, shall we say, would you say that this was something that was irritating you or creating attention when it came to your engagement with the film context, because it was so locked into professional standards or professional norms that your self-determination was constricted, your ability to try things out?
I didn't even get to the point where I could, have these kinds of thoughts. I simply didn't have any sort of point of contact with the industry, because also it wasn't a professional product in the sense, the kind of things I wanted to make.
Mm-hmm. Well, then if we flip it around to the art context and what it means to be a professional artist, how was that designation determined? If it is so much about having the freedom and the agency to just do whatever comes to your mind.
That question is close to triggering an anxiety attack. Like, what is a professional artist? I have no idea. I hope I'm not. I'm not included into whatever kind of definition.
Okay. Because
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's triggering for me because I'm a professor, and yet I don't have a PhD, and I don't. People have told me to my face, "You don't look like a professor. You don't talk like a professor." Maybe I don't even walk like a professor. So I don't know if it speaks to a certain.
Let's practice. We can walk on the table back and forth until we'll nail it.
Okay, as long as you walk with me, we'll do a runway demonstration of professional artists.
Intellectual walking.
So I mean, the word that comes to my mind somehow is de-skilling. I mean, it's weird to associate that with a white-collar job, because that's something that the blue-collar labor class has, it's been argued on their behalf that, the sense of craft, of being an expert at what you do, has been replaced by technology on the one hand, and then also this neoliberal sense of self-determined, you can do whatever you want as long as you put in the time. You can try this, you can try that, and technology gives you the resources to do things without having to go to school for so many years and get trained. I'm not going to talk so much about myself, just to give you a context of my where I'm coming from. I made video essays for many years as a way of studying cinema for myself because I could not afford to go to film school. So I made video essays that then became popular and valuable for other people who were learning about film and using YouTube and the internet because they couldn't afford to go to film school either. But then what also happened was that film professors then told me, oh, your videos are so useful because I spend half an hour trying to explain cinematography or editing to students and they don't understand my words, but then I put in your video, I go outside and smoke a cigarette, and then I come back 15 minutes later and they totally understand it. So then I thought, well, I need to get in on that action so I can make a living showing my own videos. So then that led me to pursue academia. So I guess my question for you is, when did it have a turning point for you where your methodology really started to catch an interest or catch quote unquote value?
Let me just backtrace 2 steps. While you were talking, I was wondering about the vitality of an art form, right? And what does it have to do with de-skidding? So let's take cinema. I don't think it would be still so vital as an art form if people didn't feel on some level or another that they could also, try to do it. And there are so many entry barriers to different technologies which are very different, right? So for example, if you try to do VR on your own, it's pretty daunting, right? I mean, I think almost anyone can do a video and upload it to somewhere very quickly, but if you try to do a VR work, the entrance barrier is very high. And I think this is also why it's not a vital art form as of yet, because people cannot really mess around with it and experiment. Same with machine learning, it's getting much more easy now. There's much more, let's say, user-oriented tools for people to mess around with it. But if you're not given even as a spectator in a way, an audience, a chance to sort of participate in this art form, and it doesn't really have in relation of being able to make it, but even to discuss it, to be a part of a community, etc., then it's not vital. This is also why I think that for example, film criticism or film education is so centrally important, for keeping cinema alive or making it vital, because if there aren't these groups and communities of people that keep talking and discussing whatever happens on the screen, then it's going to sort of die and wither. And this, in that sense, I think it relates somehow to de-skidding. If it's an art form which allows some level of access, of participation, regardless on which level, then I think it will engage people and draw people. This is also why social media platforms, I think, is one part why they are so successful, because the entrance barrier is so low, and basically anyone can at least have the illusion of participating.
But it really speaks to this historic disruption, I find, in in the education market, such as it is, because of social media, because the production of knowledge has been reorganized and redistributed because of social media. Somehow, and at the same time, the education industry is sort of facing a crisis. PhDs who've spent years developing their dissertation and now trying to find a job. I know PhD friends who are now starting their own YouTube channels or their own Substacks, because this to them feels like a more profitable or fulfilling way of pursuing a career than applying for basically freelance academic jobs as adjunct, part-time instructors. So it speaks to the kind of conditions of the contemporary marketplace. Now, you are also an educator. You teach at the UDK, the University of Art in Berlin. So you are exposed to this side of the artistic, because artists, they have to, many of them have to find supporting careers as educators. So how do you see the marketplace? I'm sorry to keep using these crass terms that many people try to disassociate from art, but your own work, I think, makes this confrontation between the labor practice, the economics, and the politics of art, of culture, of education. So how do you see it manifested in your own relationship to education?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky to be a teacher because it makes me independent, right? So financially independent to some degree. But I also think that, in terms of this economic aspect of the profession, the thing that's wildly overlooked is that usually artists are their biggest sponsors, right? We are talking about sponsorship, about patronage, etc., but most artists put in so much, time and labor into creating whatever they create, so they end up being their own sponsors usually and supporting their practice through this multitude of other jobs, education, mediation, I don't know, Patreon-based kind of economies. So it's artists have found ways to support themselves, and I think it's important at this point to make that visible, these mixed economies that in fact sustain artistic practice.
I mean, we had an earlier conversation in the 24-hour conversation at the base camp. I don't know if any of you attended any part of the 24-hour conversation. It was also live stream on Twitch, and so you can watch the recording. You can watch all 24 hours recorded on Twitch. And since I mentioned Twitch, again, we talk about platforms, social media platforms as a resource. You engage with this in your own work. I think we see a little bit in the Social Sim exhibition. It actually makes me wonder, seeing you, if you were a young student today, would you be more gravitated towards TikTok or Twitch or these platform-based ways of expressing your creativity? How would you approach them?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell. But I think right now these platforms are quite... The range of possibilities is quite limited, right? In terms of, I mean, one thing I witnessed is the change of algorithm in YouTube, which deprived so many creators of any kind of income, right? So if you're always dependent on some kind of platform CEO/deity, not to change the algorithm, otherwise you're gonna be broke. That's not a great situation to be in. Right?
Okay, so that raises two questions for me. First, have you observed your own students pursuing a career through these social media platforms, trying to do something innovative, unexpected, surprising with them? And B, is what you're describing about this platform-based creation that's really at the mercy of YouTube or Meta's or Google's algorithm? Is that really so different from the whims of the art market? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That the art market also has a way of depriving or changing the rules, and that people are always needing to evolve their practice or understand what the market is wanting.
Yeah, true. That's absolutely correct. But I'm surprised that my students are not engaging as much with social media platforms as you would expect them to. Somehow it's not so interesting. They are more in creating social practices and relations than also IRL, than to try to engage with TikTok, for example.
Do you think that's a function of a kind of social media burnout, whether it's because of the pandemic kind of put us in this hyper active state of being dependent on media technologies and being in front of our screens for way too long? Is it kind of coming out of that phase, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one aspect, but maybe there's also a social media burnout that's more wide-ranging, right? I don't know.
And what do you find them seeking, or what ways of life and being together do you find them practicing as a substitute?
I think the challenge now is to basically create social structures that enable people to make a living, but also to live. I mean, it's very basic, right? So to try to invent and maintain these structures is more important for that generation. Yeah.
I guess it's a way, thinking about ways of being together makes me think about the exhibition that's installed at the Rivellino, and thank you very much, Arminio, for being the host of this. So it's next to the Palacinema, the Rivellino. It's an installation called Social Sim, which I have to say I find myself having difficulty trying to describe, because it has so much packed into it, and really captures, to me, a very intense period of social unrest during the pandemic. So it feels very much a vivid encapsulation of a particular moment in our global experience. But just to talk about the title, because it's Social Sim, which also I think is a playful rearrangement of socialism. Okay, so could you talk about Social Sim, but also how it connects to socialism?
So the first scene is a neural network that tries to learn the word social sim, and it tries 1,000 times and 10,000 times, but it never manages. It always ends up saying socialism, and then the basically engineers that try to train it kill it. It's basically the film, I mean, it deals about a bunch of different things. Basically, how to make films during pandemia, I think, is maybe one of the main topics. How to try to still keep doing something if you cannot shoot anything, if everything is virtual, you cannot meet anyone. So basically, it deals with this moment of quite severe disruption. Social sim relates to all these algorithms that were trying to predict, for example, infections. We had a lot of these, algorithms that would predict infection curves and so on and so on. But there are, of course, many social simulations that try to predict basically anything, any sort of social activity. We are working with the actual mathematics of these algorithms and sort of translating them into 3D unity choreographies, basically, because my idea is that the algorithms which govern and predict society act like dancers are being choreographed. These are social choreographies because they put bodies into space and basically prescribe certain relation and movements to them. And so we are basically in a period where these algorithms or social simulations are able to choreograph a lot of social behavior. So how to turn this social behavior into something that's actually social and not only social in name, that could also act as something which is more horizontal and more egalitarian, right? Then basically we were working with one algorithm which is used to predict rebellions, meaning for police to be able to gauge the amount of unrest in the population, but also to come up with punishments that would prevent, people to join uprisings, etc. So how do we go from this sort of police algorithm to something else which could be, I don't know, pointed to under the rubric of socialism?
Have you seen this practiced in real life by people, either individually or collectively, who've tried to manipulate algorithms, hack the system? Like, I don't know, something you described made me think about these, I think it was these TikTokers who were fans of BTS, the Korean pop group, who in 2020, during the US presidential election, Trump was planning his big comeback rally after he had COVID, and it was staged in a venue in Oklahoma, I think. And the TikTokers, what they did was that they all agreed to reserve tickets. So I think almost 20,000 tickets were reserved for these TikTokers who then didn't show up. So this, to me, is an example of hacking the system, manipulating the algorithms as a way of, well, in this case, it depopulated the social space. So I don't know if you can think of other examples.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's lots of examples in which people try to manipulate the algorithm which govern them. There's a lot of, for example, unions of delivery workers worldwide that try, for example, by placing fake orders, that try to manipulate basically their distribution in space so that they could all meet in one place to rally and to have a demonstration. So basically attempts to harness some kind of swarm intelligence, let's maybe put it like that. That's happening. How successful this is, I don't know, but I mean, it's an interesting experiment in trying to engage with this kind of algorithmic control technologies.
And in terms of how to engage with this work, because you are in some ways trying to transfer or interpret these algorithmic operations into an audiovisual experience in physical space. So it is your way of producing a state of social coming together by audiovisual means. And so we have inside the Rivellino, the main projection is a front screen and then these two walls that have these projections of animated police officers. Well, it's not clear if they are police officers because I think some of them have the word people on the back, and that their movements are determined by, I guess, algorithmic computations, data that is then interpreted into dance movements that they are enacting.
That's a social simulation that's called Dancing Mania. Dancing Mania was something which historically really existed. It was a sort of infectious condition. No one really knows what happened with people, but they started dancing starting from the 11th century. It was something that proliferated in the Rhine Valley, and people started dancing until they died sometimes. They were completely exhausted but still kept dancing, and up to this day no one really knows what happened, right? And we tried to model this kind of dancing mania. So people walking around, and if an infected person comes close to the others, then he will or she will start infecting the others, and then everyone is dancing, and then everyone dies, and then they resurrect, and they need to do it all over again. I was just trying to imagine how must one of these little dots in this infection simulation feel. You know, they get infected all the time, they die, and they do it over and over again. So I was trying to think, you know, from this pixel point of view.
And how do you relate to these figures? I really encourage you all to see it, just to see how you respond to them, because they really feel like they have lives of their own.
Ooh, maybe. I mean, they don't have, they have some algorithms, but it's not really 100% predictable how they move. There's also some, you know, not emergent phenomena, but unexpected moves, let's put it like that.
Yeah, I mean, cinema has always produced this kind of illusion where we somehow temporarily believe that these images of figures projected on the wall are something like living beings that we can connect to, that we relate to emotionally and affectively. When it comes to the types of images that you are producing, to me it's clear that they are not representative of real people per se, and that they are more tied to the manipulation of data. And yet still something about the way you have them move makes me connect to them and start to project lives onto them. It's also, to me, it's similar to how with something like GPT-3 text generation. I don't know if, how many of you have had this the experience of working with a text generation app where you type, please tell me a horror story about the Locarno Film Festival, or please write me a romantic comedy about two young students who fall in love in the Locarno Film Festival, and then you press enter, and suddenly the screen starts typing text all by itself, and for a moment you just feel like there's some being at the other end of this interface that is doing the work doing the work, and that it is something that's thinking, that's alive. And so how does that proposition of AI being having a life of its own, how do you respond to this possibility?
Well, I think it's two very different things, right? My small dancing avatars and GPT-3 both have different logics. The dancing avatars only look endearing because they move in a funny way, and this is just the genius of the programmer, a guy called Hito, who programmed a procedural dancing animation, which is very simple, just moves in sine curves, but is mathematically very beautiful, but produces these extremely funny movements. So this is all that there is to it, right? GPT-3 is different because it's a model that's being trained on basically all the text that the model could get its hold on, meaning it's basically the whole internet, which makes it feel like some kind of social unconscious, really, because it has so many different layers and components that if you poke it, then you have the feeling that, there is some kind of subconscious emerging from there. Yeah.
Did you, for the dancing figures,
yes,
did you have many iterations that you then had to select which ones seem to have a role in your film? Because like with GPT-3 and DALL-E, I know people who work with them, and they have to go through many permutations and keep entering more specific data so that they get a more desirable result. So it's not necessarily that the algorithm and already produces fully formed works of art, but that there is a kind of a close collaboration, if you will. Do you see artificial intelligence as a collaborator or more of a tool?
No, it's more like a music instrument, right? And I think this is really the comparison, because many of these machine learning algorithms depend fully on the parameters you give them. I mean, it really depends on the parameters, otherwise you can go from complete noise to something which is actually interesting. And this you have to figure out. It's like learning to play an instrument, really. DALL-E, for example, just a few days ago someone published a whole guidebook of possible, hacks how to manipulate the outcome. So really the algorithm as such exists, but if you're able to really make something with it, is up to you. And these things already have a user interface, right? And most algorithms don't really have a user interface. It's much more, let's say, hands-on and numbers-based, the kinds of inputs which you have to give. So it's probably like cooking, people have 3 tomatoes and I don't know, some fish, and whatever you do with these ingredients is really up to the skills and resources of the person who makes that.
Okay, so you're working with this computational technology. At the same time, you're working with screens as, let's say, as a technology or as materials that express your own intention, which is very different from traditional cinema. Because traditional cinema, you have a screen. When a director makes a film, they're probably not thinking about how many screens there will be. There's just the expectation that there is a screen and everyone's watching it more or less the same way. Although in reality, it's quite different because now we're watching things on phones and laptops. So how do you approach this space with the 3 screens? You do have a seating area with multiple seats, so it does have some hints of the cinematic space as we have known it. In other words, I guess I'm asking, how does that classic cinema, in the art world we call it the black box environment, what does that still hold for you, or what does it hold for you at this point?
I mean, it's a great environment for a certain viewing situation. For example, in a traditional cinema, people rarely leave, right? I mean, they do, but it's not standard. Whereas in an art space, it's basically the default. Every spectator leaves before the end of the film. You just have to deal with it. So in a way, it's a good space of confinement. If you have to hold people, like in a prison, the cinema is super good. The art space has its advantage because it needs to invent something in order to, have people watch your piece till the end. So in a way, what you're able to do is to build a cinema which is specific to your work, right? So basically the architecture becomes part of the work. Just imagine you're a filmmaker, you're making a film, but then you're also able to design the cinema that goes along with it. Of course, I mean, keeping in mind resources, blah, 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 and so on. But it's fun also. I mean, or it can be fun.
Mm-hmm. And extending that question to contemporary cinema, the works of movies, or if we want to be generous, Netflix, which to some extent is still following traditional classic modes of storytelling, narrative-based experience. Where does that fit in your life? Are you watching films or TV series? Do they give you inspiration these days?
Oh, for me, Netflix is like the art space. It's full of abandoned attempts to watch something. You see, okay, watched it for 17 minutes, watched it for 19 and a half. I mean, of course, it depends on the work, right? But I don't know.
Okay, that's a really...
It's something I love to abandon, halfway through.
That's a charming way of linking it to because studies have shown that the average work of art, especially audiovisual art, is only experienced by 15 or 30 seconds. People just look at it and they just want to figure it out. Do I like it or not? And then they just go on. It's really bad in art fairs and exhibitions like biennales. I mean, it's a very so this space that you have in the Rivellino is really quite a privileged space because you kind of have to go there and really see for yourself what's going on. But it's funny that you connect this to Netflix, that most media and creative works these days are at an imminent risk of perpetual abandonment. They're like the orphans
of attention.
Yeah, exactly, the orphans of attention.
Yeah.
And do you just accept that as just kind of like the existential state? Are we just always in this kind of endless Tinder scroll, like just swiping temporarily and then just having a 15-second encounter and then disposing of it?
No, but I think, in cinema there's clearly a different set of expectations. I mean, you go there and then usually you already know that you will have to spend X time and then you do it. So basically the social set of expectations around it is very different, I guess.
So movies are really in a state of attentional privilege. They are kind of like the elite that get to enjoy a full 90 minutes or 2 hours of your attention. And I mean, this easily gets quantifiable. I mean, this is literally what companies like Netflix and Google and Meta base their business models on, because time for them literally is money. And so you have Netflix, which invests in long-form series that just captures you for hours and hours, unless you're Hito. And then, then you have TikTok and YouTube, which are more into microdosing, shall we say, where you just keep getting like these quick hits of dopamine by watching something for 6 minutes, 10 seconds. I'm sorry, 6 seconds, 10 seconds, and so on. So it's these two competing economic models. So where do you find yourself in the economics of attention? Do you think about the audience and how to engage them? Do you insert cliffhanger elements in your work, or do you just think like maybe it's just not even productive to go into this line of thinking?
Well, I do, because I know that people will come and go every few minutes. So basically, works are usually structured in these kind of short chapters, and you don't really need to see them in a sequence. So basically, you can catch up every 5 minutes. But I don't know. I mean, of course, this is how I've structured my work until now, but how is it going to be going forward? I really don't know, right? I mean, after pandemia, what we have seen is that many spectators, the audience hasn't come back, neither to cinemas nor to museums. So basically there is a whole different situation in terms of attention or sharing spaces. And also probably for me as a person who, like most people working in projection, needs some kind of darkness, I need to reorient, right? I mean, what if the cinema as a space is undergoing a multiple crisis, first of all because of pandemia, but now because of the energy crisis, climate crisis, and so on and so on. Maybe, you know, I shouldn't rely on the shelter of a dark space, which is institutionally protected and also funded. Maybe the cinematic situation is going to be much more homeless in the future, right? Or mobile, or outdoors, or dispersed. I mean, these are the questions I'm really asking myself now. What's going to happen to theaters in Germany this winter, right, if there is no heating? Or are, conversely, cinemas going to turn into heating places for people who cannot afford heating, right? So, and what does this mean for the future of storytelling, which is really dependent on this kind of situation? First of all, it's indoors. Second, it's dark. Thirdly, there are some resources, whether it's heating or electricity or other things. Then again, you know, I mean, I really am now thinking about film shooting very differently than a few years ago. I try not to go on planes to shoot something. I try to be on my own if I need to go somewhere and not take a team, etc., etc. So how are all these conditions going to affect also the narratives that are going to be invented? Are they going to be more vernacular, more focused on the local? Are the teams going to shrink? Are production values going to change? So, for example, today I went because I think the thing that interests me most is how can you create a sort of cinematic situation which is outdoors, you know, and where you need to move. So you cannot be in your seat anymore. How is it even going to work? Are you going to use augmented reality? Are you going to use LED screens? Is it going to be some kind of theater almost, like an outdoors performance? I mean, these are the questions I'm asking myself now, because I think that the set of conditions which I've relied on and which I have taken for granted, namely there is some kind of space and things can happen, I'm not sure, you know, how this is going to be modified in the future.
What you just said gave me something like a temporal vertigo, because here we are sitting in like almost 30-degree weather with fans blowing, trying to keep us cool and comfortable, and then you're talking about a near future, maybe 4 months from now, where many places won't have the resources, the energy to operate.
We don't know.
We don't know,
right?
but it's a speculation.
It's very well possible.
Right, yeah. And you know, we've just been through like over 2 years of temporal speculation with COVID. Like, what will it be like 6 months from now? And it really becomes a Rorschach test of our optimism, pessimism, and how we can forecast ourselves into the future. So how do you approach these questions of, because what you were saying about what kind of resources you will require and how reasonable or sustainable are these resources, listening to you, it almost feels like there's an implicit answer, which is we need to scale down. But do you think it's that deterministic?
I don't know whether the quantity really is the most decisive factor. I don't really know. I think that all these factors need to be recalibrated and also turned into different formats. Because also what I see is that most people are more interested in like face-to-face encounters than seeing anything on any screen. So how do we, create new formats that roll all of these things into one, like almost street performance kind of thing, or narrations in chapters. So I don't know. These are the kinds of thoughts I'm having now, because I'm not. People, including myself, thought during pandemic, okay, after a while everything is going to go back to some kind of previous situation, but I don't think so, actually. And of course, there's not going to be one apocalyptic crisis happening. At least it's not so probable right now, but there will be this whole host of different things which are exacerbating one another and creating some domino or knock-on complications.
Well, maybe it speaks to my own projection or my wish that we do more with less. And maybe in some ways that's actually one could argue that's a conservative position, because it's a way of kind of protecting oneself against the uncertainties of what we might be facing or dealing with in the future. But it also reminds me of my favorite essay of yours, and really one that gave me so many ideas and inspiration, called In Defense of the Poor Image, where you're describing this world of images that aren't the ones we see in cinemas or on television, second or third generation copies of DVDs or small video files that get distributed through illicit networks, and they do so much to inform, let's say, a lower economy people, and they do so much to circulate around the world and allow people to access information, entertainment, and participate in global culture. And here we are talking about it in a place which I would call a locus of rich images. I mean, the film festivals really pride themselves on, elitism, a luxury type of image experience. So it is a bit perverse, bringing you, a great thinker, about the rights and the agency of the poor image in this mecca of rich images. And I guess I want to ask you, how do you personally relate to these formulations? Because now that your work is circulating in galleries, how do you maintain your own relationship to the poor image?
I mean, the poor image has changed a lot. The thing that I was trying to describe was the sort of SD, PAL, or NTSC image, which was still in a 4:3 format. It seems like the Neolithic now, I mean, so long ago. And now, of course, the standard image is HD or even 4K. That's standard now. So in that sense, the poor image does not exist in the way it used to. But I think, I mean, if we say this much more in general, then it's making more models of things, This is the poverty, trying to indicate something instead of realizing it with a lot of resources, basically projecting it without, without the project necessarily being already formulated or ready. So it's more about that, trying to basically create a possibility for something without building the full thing.
Okay, so then it's more about having a specific role to play within a larger system, rather than creating a whole system.
No, it
itself?
also, if you build a model of something, a model of a building and not the whole building, then you also open up a space of common imagination, right, around it. Then the model could be actualized in many, many ways, but how is up for debate, and this is something that needs to be figured out in common. A model is also a place for a conversation, whereas, let's say, a building that has been built can maybe allow other kinds of conversation, but this is a fact.
Well, then let's exercise that model approach now, because here we have a model of a forum for a conversation. And is it going to be just a dialogue between two people on the stage, or will it involve some feedback and questions from our audience? So, in other words, does anyone have a question? Yes. Should we have a microphone for her? Okay.
Thank you. I have a really general question, if that is okay. I am very fascinated with this like whole technological world, and I am a game designer, and I try to make meaningful things within that space, and I think it can exist, but I do find myself very discouraged by the community and by the world of technology, which is sort of really hostile to the arts, and which like the community sort of tends to deny that they exist within like a socio-cultural space at all. And there's like lots of controversies. Like recently, the CEO of Unity had this like big controversial statement with all about monetization and really like just rejecting everything more artistic. And I just kind of find myself wondering, like, I do find this fascinating, but kind of why am I doing this to myself? This world of like this really like hostile world sort of. And I just wanted you to like maybe go into like, why do you find yourself drawn to these tools, to this world, and to this space to express yourself and your artwork?
Yeah, I see what I completely see what you mean. On the other hand, I think that specifically the gaming technologies are so crucial to the contemporary social imaginary, and also they are quite accessible, right? I mean, Unity is for free, you download it, you just, within a week, you can have a sort of viable project. And I think to sort of change the gaming also industry imaginary of quantification, of having to, accumulate points, this winning mentality and so on, that would be really so important, to create different games, to also unlearn this kind of reflex of shooting, anything that moves on a screen. So I don't know, but I'm doing it too. So what can I say? My condolences. Yeah.
Could I just ask, what games have you played with? I know you've worked with Minecraft, and you've even taught your classes with your students inside of Minecraft, but do you do like first-person shooter?
No, I make first-person shooter.
Oh, you make first-person shooter. Wow, that's even worse.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
I have one, but this is very secret, one exhibition room where I have all of my works, but a person that goes around and shoots everything works. But that's very secret, yeah.
Yeah. You said before that you don't see the spectators coming back to the cinema, and we are talking about the future of the cinema. And if I also see it like that. It's very rare that people go to cinema now, and I think it's just a question of time when the cinema is over, because people can't exist without getting entrance fees and things like that. So what do you think, will it go on? Because the visual aspect is very important in our society, so people are just in the internet and not paying anymore, or how do you see the future of the cinema? The cinema in a classical sense, like we know, dark room and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there will be sort of any catastrophic change, but uneven change, which means that many of the smaller cinemas will not be able to operate, and then it will be, more of the franchise cinema, multiplex things going on. I don't really know, right? I can't tell you, but I think what I can tell you is that there is a necessity of trying to invent forms which respond to this moment, because I'm afraid that this moment will last. And it will require a different relation to all sorts of technologies, and maybe no technologies even, right? Because also, I mean, we're talking a lot about technology, about social media. What happens when electricity starts getting rationed? It's not, I mean, it's not unheard of. It happens in Beirut every day. So, you know, all the things that we think we can rely on for the future, for the next 20 years, maybe not, right? And it will creep in. It won't be catastrophic. And people will get used to it. But I think the forms of storytelling, of course, will survive as long as humanity somehow exists, and they will adapt. And it will be a slow and uneven process, but I think it will start. And I think all these certainties that we have, there will be an opera, there will be a cinema, there will be a library. Oh, maybe not, right? Yeah.
I'll offer a slightly varied response in that I agree with you that there will be this increasingly luxurious, rich cinema. Like imagine the Cineplex for Marvel movies, but even more sort of exclusive in terms of the quality of the experience and everything they can throw at you technologically, and the most comfortable seats, the best food, whatever you imagine. It will just keep going in this direction. But I also see on the more ground level, more modest level, micro cinemas, personalized, self-organized cinemas by dedicated people. I'm already seeing this in different parts of the world that offer something more artisanal, more community-based, more dedicated to choosing films that are meant to bring a small but select community of people together. So these kind of extremes, but I guess what I would say would be missing is this middle, the space of films that attract, how should we say, something that's not about spectacle and something that's not so specialist. The kind of things that used to be in cinemas but now are increasingly on Netflix, like character-based dramas, things that are more analogous to literature but in the form of movies, novels, and so on. You had a question? Yeah.
You've referred to the shortage or the possible shortage of electricity in the context of cinema, but I was wondering how that, because your artistic practice is also electricity dependent, and if you do have a strategy on how you would translate your research and your thoughts and your practice into something non-digital, if that is a possibility, or if you're like a strictly digital artist too.
Good question. I don't really know. I mean, honestly, in the past year, I thought to myself the most durable and maybe simplest way to make a poor images is just to do a mosaic, but I don't know. But I know that in my practice, I'm trying to reduce electricity consumption in all different kinds of ways. For example, we're not running a live simulation at Rivellino, so the computer is not running all the time. There's recordings, etc. I've now built a solar contraption for my next show to power the projectors, and so on and so on. So maybe also, I mean, until now, I had a lot of fun creating all these sort of architectural environments, but maybe the infrastructural environments for works are also interesting from now on. Can we think of a work which also has a water filtering contraption, right, etc.? That could be interesting. Not only the energy part, which I think should be a consideration, but also other kinds of infrastructure.
Do you think that art should take on more of a, shall we say, solutionist application, like it helps provide things to solve problems?
Well, not necessarily. No, that's narrowing it down.
But do you think it will be pressured, given what you described as these rather dire circumstances that we might anticipate that it might have to?
I think, honestly, for me, it would be so challenging and interesting to create a sort of fountain, which also filters water. And this is not just utilitarian. There has been all this whole art history of creating fountains, of working with water, etc., 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 right? So, you can combine both. Also from a technological engineer point of view, it's interesting for me. What is reverse osmosis? How do these things work, right? So basically, that's a part of technology that I would like to engage with more. There's a question back there.
Hello, thank you. I'm just thinking about this through the perspective of like the live music scene, because the similar thing has been going on for quite a while.
Yeah.
And one of the solutions to that over the years has been people creating like house concerts, bringing musicians into their homes and just presenting shows to their friends and to the public as well. And I'm curious if this is something that's also happening with cinema, like are there house cinema things going on, and do you think it's a viable solution for keeping cinema going in some way if cinemas become empty? Will people just put stuff on in their house and invite people over?
Yeah, you've had these, during the pandemic, you had these watch parties. Netflix even implemented it as part of their features that you could watch simultaneously with others and you could have a live chat going on and so on. In terms of people being in the same space, I mean, that's been going on for years and years since there have been like, home projecting systems or TVs and things like that. Yeah, it's interesting that you want to, how do you analogize that with music? I wonder if viewing parties will be as prolific in years to come as music. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's primarily one main way of enjoying sound together, which is music and dancing. But in terms of enjoying images, now you have gaming, you have an increasingly diverse field of audiovisual experiences to either enjoy by yourself or with others. So film, as it were, seems to be surrounded by a number of alternatives, and it's just a question of how film will continue to maintain its distinct value, its identity, and its relevance to your generation and those younger than you, compared to gaming or VR or whatever. I don't know what you think, Hito. Or how does one experience art at home? I mean, if you're saying that galleries might be compromised because of the energy crisis, how do you experience art at home?
I was just thinking, we were talking about these orphans of attention before, these, barely watched fragments of things, and what they need, of course, is an orphanage. And I think all these, house forums, either it's music or something else, are kinds of orphanages, no? And otherwise it won't maybe work. I don't know how to experience art at home, but also why not? It's always happened, right? Or maybe not even at home, it could be outside also, in public space, in the urban space. I always have this. I think my main obsession is now us in winter, 30 degrees minus, one actor who has to perform guerrilla style somewhere in cold Berlin Square. Maybe we'll spend more time outside in the winters if we don't have energy to heat our homes. Or just bundle up together somewhere. Or share, I mean, one place is heated. I don't want to sound so dystopic, but this is also a way to share resources. Yeah. So only one person has to heat and not 10. When I lived in New York City and I would go to a late night screening, I would often see homeless people sleeping in the back row, and so that gave me this idea of another use for this space other than what it was intended, but was benefiting people. And so, why not turn it into a makeshift care center for people who lack resources to fend for themselves. Oh yeah.
You were speaking about VR before and how it's not yet a vital art form, maybe because the barrier to entry is so high. And so I'm wondering if you think that it's on its way we're creating ways for more people to access VR as an art form that they can mess around in and have that freedom to play with it, or if you think there's not even the desire to transform this art form for some reason within its nature, that the nature of this art form, there's somehow less desire to make it as widestream or mainstreamly popular for the masses to play with this.
I'm sure Meta would disagree. I mean, they're basically staking the entire future of their company on the ability for as many people as possible to experience the virtual social web, and it's just a matter of whether they can get enough people to put headsets on their heads within the next 2 years.
Well, but that's really a deterrent for me, right? Because I know if I'm going to now make a VR work, I need to build it to Oculus Quest or something. And I don't really want to be stuck with Facebook. I mean, there is now still some ways to not have a Facebook account and still be able to see something on Oculus glasses, but I'm not sure whether this will still continue, and I don't want to create a work which can only be accessed through a Facebook account, right? I mean, it's a real deterrent for me. The same with programming apps. I mean, you have a little bit more choice of formats there, but I know that if I'm going to put a lot of work into it, then I need to build it to the two main platforms, and which means that people will need one of these devices to even access it, right? There is no open format, and I think this is what impedes the development of VR most, that it's not an open format. It's not something which you can see across platforms, across devices.
But it's such a contrast from 15 years ago when Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, and it just seemed like the rhetoric of a closed system because it guarantees the optimal quality of experience, and everyone, well, not everybody, but it was widely embraced. And so that's how the iPhone became such a dominant technology device. And now I think Mark Zuckerberg is basically trying the same playbook, but really getting a lot of resistance. It's really fascinating, and maybe that's a sign of how we've changed in our thinking and relationship to technology in the last 15 years, given so many disappointments and false utopian promises that technology was going to deliver to us. So there's a lot more, I find a lot more skepticism towards platform-based social experiences and technologies. But do you see opportunities for people to self-organize or to find spaces? If it's not Meta, then it's another platform, and so it's a question of which platforms do we agree to adopt and find each other in.
I don't know. I had this crazy thought going through my mind, because the HoloLens is also co-produced by the US military. I said to myself, well, unless the US military is going to, open source their standard, there is no way. But that's not a real possibility, I think.
No, probably not. Any last? Okay.
So I was wondering for the definition of cinema, if it's defined through a collective experience, like having more, like multiple people or a single viewer, talking about like having a space of shared heating. For example, if a cinema is transformed into a space where people go to heat up, then maybe the storytelling is still there, because then they will talk to each other, and then instead of having this like a filmed or audiovisual, like a visual filmed visual, I guess, you'd have the faces or like the people who are like in front of you. So, and then in the same time, Netflix and all these streaming platforms, they go to the singularity when you're like in front of your own screen. So I don't know, maybe there's, and then it kind of goes back to the past when like the fireplace used to be a cinema for people who gather together. So maybe like the future is like the past going to the future.
Yeah, and all of this will be a Netflix series, right? You will have the Netflix people of the people who assemble in the cold cinema and make a fire out of the benches, and then one by one will start telling their story of why they cannot afford heating. And then we have a loop. No, I'm joking. But I agree with you. I mean, this is also why I say that narrative forms will survive one way or another, no? Yeah. But maybe in a very different form. And maybe the cinema will be the stage for these stories being told not on the screen, but in a different way.
Yeah, there's something about your question when you said, okay, we'll all be together in the same space, but instead of looking at the screen, we'll look at each other. And that made me imagine a live version of Instagram or TikTok where instead of looking at each other's selfies, we're just looking at each other in real life, and why not? and TikTok, which is basically a variety show, I mean, that's what we did in communities, at least in the United States. Every so often, we would gather in the community center, and those who had some kind of talent to perform in front of others would do so in front of relatives, friends, neighbors, and so on. And all of that has been virtualized, but yeah, maybe why not use this winter as a way of coming together and having those kinds of experiences again?
TikTok live.
Yeah. And we'll do our fashion walk on the table of yes. Artists and
intellectual walking skills.
But maybe not today. Well, if there are no other questions, then I really want to thank you for your co-presence. Please keep this in mind. Replicate it in any way you can. And thank you very much, Hito, for your time. Thank you.
Ich wollte danken, dass du so normal geblieben bist, so uneitel.